All right, good afternoon. We introduced ourselves before, but with this awesome slide behind us, we are
Jake Hall, the Manufacturing Millenial.
and I'm just John Dyck from CESMII, the Smart Manufacturing Institute. We're getting started early here. We're officially on from 1 to 1:30, but we thought we'd get started here, given that you're here and with the lunch before you probably consumed or mostly consumed, there may be a tendency to wander away. So we're just going to grab you while you're here and at least grab your attention while you're here. So with that said, our goal is to talk about 5 myths of smart manufacturing and just kind of talk to you a little bit about our experience representing the Manufacturing Millenial and CESMII, the Smart Manufacturing Institute. We'll start in a moment by introducing ourselves with a little more context so you understand where Jake's coming from and where I'm coming from. But as I mentioned before, as we mentioned in our intro, we have a bit of a stump the chump thing going on here. We do want to interact with you as the audience, and we do want good questions from you. And we'll do our best to answer them and respond. And if not, either way, if you ask a good question, we're going to give you one of these awesome, I'm told it's a beverage cooler where I come from, but either way, it's going to keep the beverage cool or your notebook intact, regardless of where you go. So with that, maybe you want to talk a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jake Hall. I'm a millennial in the manufacturing space, which there are not a lot of millennials. I've been in the industry for about 16 years now. My first job was sweeping the floors at a robotics integration company. Went to college, got my manufacturing engineering and my mechanical engineering degrees. Went to work for an automation distributor for 7 years, and currently I work at an industrial tech company where we help companies implement their digital transformation strategies and solutions. So the other big thing for me is I have, over the past few years, grown to be an influencer in the manufacturing space. To say, okay, what's an influencer, Jake? You're not up here doing TikTok dances and all that stuff. No, I am not. I'm not planning on doing any dances in front of you today. But what I want to talk about is how do we advocate our industry in a better way that's going to integrate new technologies and innovation into our workforce, into our processes that's going to attract a new workforce, a younger workforce down the road. So over the past couple of years, I've grown to about 50,000 followers on LinkedIn. I average about 500,000 views a week when it comes to content specifically around automation and manufacturing. And the goal for that really is to do 2 things. One is to better communicate to manufacturers and the end users the technology that's out there so we can better advocate how we can be competitive in a global economy. Right? With all the processes that we're facing right now, it's not always about there going out and buying a brand new piece of hardware and equipment that's going to make you successful. It's, as a company, how are you implementing solutions and automation that are going to digitally transform how you do work every day? And by how doing work every day, it's going to make you decide, are you going to attract that millennials, those Gen Zs, into our industry? We're not talking about it today during this presentation, but one of the first things that we are looking at is lack of skilled talent. And right now, when the survey came out there by Deloitte, they said 43% of Gen Zs, the people who are under 24 years old, going into manufacturing right now, want to work for a STEM career. They want to work for science, technology, engineering, and math. Well, below that's hospitality, and we keep going down the list, and there's being in tourism, and there's actually more people, when you look at the survey, that want to work at a Starbucks and be in hospitality than work for the 4.2% of Gen Zs graduating high school that want to go into a manufacturing career. And the biggest gap we need to say is, why is STEM on the top of where the future generations want to go? And why is manufacturing at the bottom? For us in this audience, we view STEM as one and the same, right? We're walking the show floor, we're seeing all these new technologies, we're seeing robots and how systems can be implemented by leveraging machine learning and AI. But there's a massive gap where manufacturing is still viewed as this dark, dirty, dangerous industry, and that is this industry that's based on innovation and technology. So I'm an influencer out there going around doing keynote presentations almost every week, traveling throughout the US and in Canada next week, and really advocating our industry for our future workforce and to our manufacturers and how we can leverage technology to transform our industry.
Awesome. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, Jake. And just a bit of a personal story before I continue with my introduction. Just triggered by what Jake just mentioned here. My family immigrated to Canada when I was 2 years old. My father worked for less than minimum wage as an immigrant who didn't speak English for 3 years, and then found this cool little thing called the community college, got his welding certificate, and all of a sudden we went from living way below the poverty level to a middle-class life that I grew up in. And of course, I got the opportunity then to go to college and have the opportunity to do what I do today. So anyway, just a personal example of how education at a very rudimentary level can take a family, in this case my family, from a poor, way below the poverty line lifestyle to a great middle-class life. So,
yeah, and the manufacturing industry is the industry that's going to allow you to do that. There's no other industry out there that can take in going into associate's degree at a community college, walking out with a 3 or 6 month certification, and having opportunities set for you for life, with also minimal student debt, right? You know, right now the average person graduating from a college is $36,000 within the state for graduating with a bachelor's degree for 4 years. Now, granted, that's going to be forgiven. We're not going to be talking about that right now. But in the general scheme of things, skilled trades in these colleges of going to learn about technology and how to integrate technology, beginning to get those certifications, is really how manufacturing is going to transform and getting that future workforce.
Yeah, those of us that are sort of in the technology world, which is probably almost everybody out here, we pay lip service to the education, knowledge, kind of work skill or upskilling world from where we stand. And I'll pause here to introduce CESMII in just a moment. You can't do technology without education. You can't do education in this manufacturing environment without thinking about digital transformation, smart manufacturing, Industry 4.0. So it's more urgent than ever that we bring together ecosystem, knowledge, and technology. And that's at the heart of what smart manufacturing is all about. A little bit about CESMII. CESMII stands for the Clean Energy Smart Manufacturing Innovation Institute. We go by the Smart Manufacturing Institute. We're funded by the federal government. We've been given $140 million and a crucial mandate to help manufacturers here in the US become more competitive through the lens and through the investment strategies of smart manufacturing. And so our vision is to accelerate the democratization of smart manufacturing, which is reducing cost and complexity so that more manufacturers, not just the Fortune 1000, although that's the middle of the bell curve, but the small and mid-sized enterprises can engage in smart manufacturing as well. Today, most of smart manufacturing is not accessible to small and mid-sized manufacturers. But the sort of interesting paradox is that unless we move the needle forward for the large manufacturers in a way that reduces cost and complexity, this ecosystem, meaning the technology providers, the systems integrators, and machine builders, will not step in and engage in ways that will drag the small, mid-sized manufacturers along. So this is truly about having a holistic view of the manufacturing ecosystem and raising the top. All boats can float high.
Yeah. And it's a great thing is, how do we enable these small to medium-sized businesses to leverage this technology that's going to make them competitive? When you look at the numbers, and I'm going to throw a bunch of statistics out to you today, that's my engineering mindset. 98.6% of manufacturers in the US are considered a small to medium-sized business. 98.6%. In fact, around 70% of them actually represent under 50 employees at a manufacturing company. So a lot of these companies don't have full million-dollar teams with directors leading their transformation. A lot of this decision-making that's happening is at a managerial level, or even a lot of times the owner directly that's making these decisions. So smart technology can be in a way that's happened over the past 5 to 10 years, where it's really transformed, that's enabling manufacturers to integrate solutions that are a much more, what we're going to talk about, cost to implement, which is kind of our number 2 thing that's completely transformed, is you don't need to have a full integration team or a full implementation team to make things roll out. You can do very small chunks and immediately see return on investment by getting more information from what your processes look like.
Yeah, when we talk about cost to implement, most people think about scalability, and when you talk about scalability, most of this is about scaling upwards. When you talk to a technology provider about scalability, the idea is that how many sites can I scale up to engage with? The real technical and commercial and societal challenge is how can you scale down and do so in a business model, with a business model that actually makes sense to your organization, which today is a real, genuine issue for most folks in this ecosystem, because you can't actually, your cost of sales, the cost of doing business with a small manufacturer, in many ways and cases, makes it impossible to engage with a small manufacturer. So from where we stand, there's an entire ecosystem challenge that is incumbent upon us as thought leaders in the space to ensure that there is a business model that allows you to engage. In fact, this is a quick anecdote. I've been around for a few decades, as you can tell. In my entire career working for a startup and GE and Rockwell Automation in this manufacturing IT zone, the sort of nexus between OT and IT, I have never actually sold our manufacturing systems to a small manufacturer. Our goal is to sell and engage and deploy in a large manufacturing environment. That's where my business incentives and my business drivers all pointed me to. Right? So that's an important thing to recognize and to rectify as we think about the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we roll through these top 5 challenges, we kind of talked a little bit about lack of skilled talent. We just talked a little bit briefly on cost to implement. Pilot purgatory, that's a big thing. When we went through this survey, John, speak a little bit on what pilot purgatory means to a lot of manufacturers and why we're seeing that as a big resistance.
Yeah, I'll start at a macro level. If you look at the data from the Federal Reserve, if you go to fred.stlouis.org, you can download some incredible data sets. If you look at 40 years, which is the data set that the Federal Reserve will expose to us, 40 years of manufacturing productivity, guess what's happened in the last decade for the first time? For the first time in recorded history, manufacturing productivity, output by worker, has plateaued and then declined. And that happened at the same time as apparently Industry 4.0 came along, and we were going to see a $10 trillion boost in manufacturing GDP productivity in this past decade.
And I'm going to stop you right there, John. All right, here is the first thing. Who has a good definition of Industry 4.0? Come on, anyone.
60 people here.
All right.
60 good ones, I think.
Oh, yeah, Mike, okay. I love asking this question. What is Industry 4.0? And then your name and where you're from as well.
Hi, I'm Adam McCormick from Everworks. We're based in Ontario and Michigan. And to the best of my knowledge, Industry 4.0 is the one that came after Industry 3.0.
Man, give the man.
Well, I mean, that's you're not wrong.
Well, and as you say that, there's a really important dynamic here. Who here believes that we're actually past Industry 3.0 and we're actually sort of in the fourth industrial revolution? By show of hands? Thank you. There's a handful, but I'm not going to rain on your parade. But I'm going to say this: we've had 40 years of building muscle memory for how to do manufacturing systems, how to innovate using software. We went from from hydraulics to pneumatics to PLCs to HMI SCADA to MES, and this vast complex space between the shop floor and the enterprise. And after 40 years of doing that kind of stuff, do you think manufacturing has turned on a dime and all of a sudden started doing some things differently, some things in a more constructive, in a more agile, in a less proprietary way? I'll leave that for you to ponder, but I'm here to say that we believe that smart manufacturing is about seeing the transition from Industry 3.0 to 4.0, and that 98% of the ecosystem is still parked doing things in the old Industry 3.0 way. So today, frankly, Industry 4.0 is self-declared. What I do is Industry 4.0. My platform is Industry 4.0. My software app, my awesome machine learning app is Industry 4.0. Well, what the heck does that mean? Any idea?
Yeah.
Right? So
everyone has their own definition.
Right.
It could be right after Industry 3.0,
Yeah. There's a comment or a question here. Somebody, here we go. The mic's on.
I'm trying. Sorry. One over there.
why don't we start over there and then we'll come back to you.
Oh, okay.
Hello. Hello. It's on.
You know what? Why don't we go here and then we'll
Yeah.
get the mic.
It's on.
Yeah, this is Gordon Shaw from NIST, the federal government under DOC. I'm still trying to define the Industry 4.0. I think it's a German version of smart manufacturing in the US.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And in the yeah, so well, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go in front. We'll get this figured out here.
Which one do you want?
All right. So I think from a candid perspective, we'll get to you in just 30 seconds. From a sort of honest grassroots perspective, most manufacturers talk about smart manufacturing or Industry 4.0 interchangeably, and it happens to encompass the strategic initiative that represents how you're going to take your business from where it is today to where you want it to be tomorrow. So that's absolutely fair. The point that I was trying to make is that it actually has to mean something objectively, and that's at least from a technology perspective, and that's the piece that we really want to communicate and convey to the ecosystem at large, so that it isn't just whatever you want it to be, that it actually means something. So with that said, question, comment?
Well, I hate to steal the thunder from a NIST colleague because I'm going to read their definition, which is manufacturing that integrates innovative technologies to respond in real time to meet changing demands and conditions.
So I think she deserves.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well. But here's the thing. You hear that, which is an awesome definition. CESMII has a derivation of that, which is our formal definition, because you got to have one. Most people will say delivering the right information to the right people in the right way at the right time, right? That's another sort of glib, kind of fun way to talk about smart manufacturing or the fourth industrial revolution. And those are all true. The bottom line is, what does it mean to you, and how do we get there? So back to pilot Purgatory, I would ask by a show of hands, how many of you think that of all of these smart manufacturing Industry 4.0 projects that were started in the last 2 years, how many of you would say more than 50% of them ended up in success, self-declared success, more than 50%?
How about
than
40%?
40%. How about 20%? So now we're getting to the right ballpark. I would say 2/3 of you said in that ballpark. And obviously it's a difficult number to ascertain, but some recent work that, do you have the stat off the top of your head?
I thought it was 23%.
So that's the best number I've heard.
Okay.
Amazon did a survey recently. Almost 92% of all smart manufacturing Industry 4.0 industrial IoT projects are not considered successful. That's an abomination, right? I mean, that's truly a terrible place for us to be. Let's just call a spade a spade. I mean, that's unbelievable. Because guess what? There's a huge ecosystem here in Chicago, and there's one. Anybody at Hanover Messe back in April this year? There's a massive ecosystem around the world that's focused on this space, thinking that this is how we drive productivity forward. And I happen to believe that that's the case. Manufacturing, Industry 4.0, smart manufacturing is how we drive productivity forward here in this country and around the world. But frankly, we're not doing a great job. I think we have to take a really hard look at why that is. And I think the 5 things you see on the screen here are at the root cause of the foundation of those things. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves and recognize that if we're technology providers, maybe there's something beyond just technology that we ought to be looking for. If we're in the education business, maybe there's something just beyond education that we ought to be looking for.
Yeah.
Maybe we can stop the sort of proprietary behaviors out there and work together to solve some of these really, really important societal, business, manufacturing competitiveness challenges that we face collectively. Because if we can't improve this number, we won't be here 5 years from now talking about smart manufacturing. We won't be, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's the big thing for me is when you look at Industry 4.0, people immediately think of oh, it's this technology that's going to make my processes better. Well, I view technology as the tool to make your processes better. How you use that tool is going to determine if you're successful or not. And I think what goes around those tools, and I want to talk about 4 and 5 real quick, because I do want to move to these slides, because this is where you're going to take your phone out, you're going to take some pictures, because there's some actually information that's coming up after this slide. But we do have, lack of strategy is the big thing, and that really dives into, you can have the best solutions out there, you can have the best technology out there, you could implement a collaborative robot into a workspace that's designed to help a person with machine tending. But if you're not then leveraging that robot to do those tasks of an operator that is enabling him to do something more, that lack of strategy and that solution isn't going to work. The same thing with executive buy-in, right? We can go in, and I have these companies all the time that I work with my day job at Feyen Zylstra, going in there and we sit down with their plant manager and their engineering team, and they love this idea. But when you don't have the director of IT or the OT on board, they say, we don't want to do the MES solution. We don't want to do SCADA. Oh, we could build that ourselves. When you don't have that executive buy-in, your system's going to fail from the top down.
So here's if I have one favor to ask of you, it's this, and I'm going to ask you. This is a rhetorical question, but I want you to think about this and ponder this. What Jake just said is something that we were saying 10 years ago, and 15 years ago, and 20 years ago. So innovation and the sort of root causes of why we're not effective, why we're less effective today than I think the anticipation would be. The hallmark of U.S. manufacturing has been innovation for decades and decades, if not centuries. So what's different today, and these things that we see here today, what's different today than 10 years ago, right? That's the essence of what smart manufacturing ought to be, right? The confluence of people, process, and technologies, that was there, that's been there forever, right? The confluence of knowledge, the need for executive sponsorship, those are not new ideas. None of these are new challenges. What is new, what should we be doing differently tomorrow than we are today, is at the essence of the 4th industrial revolution and how we actually get to the smart part of smart manufacturing. So I think those are the things that we think hard about every day at CESMII, the Smart Manufacturing Institute. Those are the problems that we work on with our partners to address in a way that allows us to have hope for 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, not to be having the same conversation about why we're still struggling to be successful with these really transformational challenges in manufacturing. So let's just kind of look at some of these statistics, right? So this is the pathway to smart manufacturing. The responses really fall into 3 categories. If you want to read the question here, Jake.
Yeah. Let's see, where's the question? I'm trying to figure out, how far along is your company in terms of adopting a smart manufacturing strategy? And there was about 200 people surveyed for this as well, if I remember it correctly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And as noted here, there's really three buckets of respondents saying, I have a strategy, but it's really not scaling yet, or we're working on a strategy, or I don't have a strategy, right? And statistically, I think it's exciting and encouraging from our perspective to note that as opposed to pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, smart manufacturing was an important strategic initiative, but frankly, most executives hadn't recognized how really, truly strategic smart manufacturing was. And so it's exciting from our perspective to see this number grow and change over the course of time. And frankly, I think that's going to continue to evolve going forward. So the next question we wanted to throw in the marketplace was, what are the goals of your company's smart manufacturing strategy? In other words, why do you think smart manufacturing is strategic? So the assumption is that it is strategic. The question is why. And so these stats speak for themselves, but I think it's important to recognize, right, Jake?
And I think the biggest one, we look at better manufacturing capability of utilization. Right now, all the manufacturers are facing massive supply chain issues when it comes across the board. They want to go out there and they want to buy a new machine. Who has a machine or a product on order right now? If it's something you guys are an integrator or you're an end user, and then whose lead time is more than 6 months waiting for those parts or that machine? it's crazy. So when we're looking out there, we want, as a manufacturer, we want to be more productive. We want to have better utilization, better OE. There's a bunch of terminologies for it. How can smart manufacturing enable what current capitalized equipment you have on the floor and processes? I think that's one of the biggest benefits, because that's where manufacturers can, at the end of the day, become the most profitable and the most productive, is by taking existing assets they're already familiar with and making them better. And that's why it's on the top of the list.
You bet. Well said, Jake. So I would like to point out one other thing. 25% at the very bottom of this list is energy productivity. I would bet that most of our organizations collectively would think that energy productivity, while a direct outcome, doesn't rank necessarily super high on this list. But with the ongoing pressure for ESG in your boardrooms, with the ongoing pressure for sustainable manufacturing, with the growing expectation for greenhouse gas emissions monitoring and reporting in a more granular way to drive the administration's objectives and our respective manufacturing organizations' boardrooms right now, I think you're going to see a dramatic shift in that sentiment. But here's the key. If you look at every single one of those items above the 25% that are focused on increasing energy productivity, every single one of those will have a significant direct impact on greenhouse gas emissions, sustainable manufacturing, and energy productivity. What we have to do better as an ecosystem is to figure out how to connect those dots and ensure that the conversations we're having when we're talking about value and return on investment for your smart manufacturing initiative, that you can have that conversation and tie that directly to your corporation's ESG objectives and to your sustainable manufacturing goals, because every one of those will have an impact on your energy productivity and on your carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions.
And not to mention as well, when it comes from a legislative point of view, I think energy productivity and energy efficiency is actually one of the most well-pushed, federal grants and incentives coming to manufacturers, is not necessarily just be more productive with your output, is to be more efficient with your energy. And I think we're seeing a lot of money. I mean, the state of Indiana, for example, has a thing right now where the state of Indiana put out a federal grant, or excuse me, a state grant that allows a lot of small to medium-sized manufacturers to integrate smart manufacturing to make their processes more energy efficient. So I'm honestly surprised it's that low on the board. I think over the next few years, as we have this energy crisis, and I'm not an economics or a world advisor, but what I am seeing is energy is going to be a higher and a higher and higher growing up the chain.
25% is up from 10% in October of 2020 when Gartner did a very similar survey and asked this same question. In October of 2020, that was 10%. So we've seen 150% growth of that strategic initiative since COVID. So this is really at the heart of the 5 myths that Jake and I wanted to address today. What are the challenges that you encounter, right? So as we talked about the fact that the vast majority of these types of initiatives struggle to gain mass, struggle to gain critical mass and momentum. This is why. And I think, frankly, as somebody who's been in the technology space my entire career, it's a little uncomfortable to see the number one response.
And just so you know that these are small to see, there is a barcode at the end of this presentation that you can scan, and it's a survey where then you can get access. So if you can't see, I see some squinting eyes in the back, you can get a copy of this presentation afterwards, just so you're aware of that. But yeah, at the top of it is the lack of skilled talent. And I mean, that's the biggest passion that I have and why I started the Manufacturing Millenial. I was at a trade show about 2 years ago, and I realized I am the only millennial sitting in the room. And I look across the room right now. I'm not going to ask, but who here is a millennial? Okay.
2, 3, 4, 5.
About a third, which is a lot higher than I thought it would be. But it's one of those things is this younger workforce is not entering the industry. And that's why we're seeing, the lack of skilled workforce, the lack of new people who are walking into our industry to integrate that technology, it's just surprising to me. My generation, we're the generation that grew up with Raspberry Pis. I have 3 3D printers in my house, so like 4 or 5 different Arduino boards and Raspberry Pis. We love innovating, we love technology, but the general consensus still in our space is, I don't want to go work for a dark and dirty industry. I would rather go work for a tech field company.
Not to mention, you're probably the most savvy generation when it comes to knowing how to not just
Absolutely.
use these, but probably write apps or leverage the value of this thing. And for most manufacturers, bringing that onto the shop floor is considered absolutely verboten, right?
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
And that is not a great place for us to be. So anyway, I just wanted to advocate for the top 3 items on this list are, without a doubt, the top 3 things that CESMII is focused on from a smart manufacturing acceleration perspective. Workforce, reducing cost, and reducing complexity for every manufacturer in this country is the heartbeat of CESMII. We're a mission-driven, not-for-profit, funding technologies and the creation of knowledge and education, workforce development material to accomplish this, or to point at and address these issues first and foremost. So if you're interested in working in this space to address these issues head on, look us up at CESMII. This is exactly what we're all about. So I think we should probably wrap here, but we've got a few more of these slides to walk through, a few at a time. But I just wanted to ask you for your questions or comments, because we've got another, I don't know, dozen or so of these beverage coolers that we'd be happy to share with you if you've got some comments or questions. But
Any questions so far, or stories? We want to keep the stories short and brief, but how you guys have seen smart manufacturing transform what you guys are doing. We have a question back here. Your name and also who you're with, if you don't mind, as well.
Hi, I'm Lyman Shantz. I'm presently an independent consultant, recently retired from Rockwell Automation. My question is, are you aware of any standard smart manufacturing solutions for mid-size manufacturers? It seems that a lot of effort is on the big companies, and the small and mid-sized companies, there's just not too many standards out there.
Great question, Lyman. I think the man deserves one of these.
I'll run it over to him. Do you want the tan or the black one? The tan one? Okay.
All right. So the question was, standard smart manufacturing solutions for the small and mid-sized manufacturing marketplace. Without being too self-promoting, this is what CESMII is focused on, right? We're engaged with some of the largest manufacturers in the world at CESMII. We're privileged to work with the Procter & Gambles of the world, and the Cornings of the world, and Toyota, and Ford, and Chrysler, and General Mills, and ExxonMobil, Linde. Some of the biggest and most sophisticated manufacturers in the world are here working with us to advance the state of the art of smart manufacturing. But 100% of what we're trying to do here is to leverage those market-making manufacturers and technology providers like Rockwell Automation, like Phoenix Contact, like Emerson, across the board, and many, many small, highly disruptive vendors like ThinkIQ and Savagent and Symphony AI and many others. I'm probably going to get in trouble for starting to name some, not naming enough, right? But the whole point is we're trying to advance the state of the art so we can leverage what these large and small, highly disruptive and innovative organizations are doing in a way that allows their solutions to actually be relevant to the small, mid-sized manufacturers. Because most of the ecosystem, like I said, is focused there. From an infrastructure perspective, we think there are some really fundamental things that we can do together with organizations like the OPC Foundation, MQTT, Spark Plug B, and VDMA, which is a great European manufacturing association, that work together on crowdsourcing important technology infrastructure and crowdsourcing the creation of applications in ways that the IT world has done for 20 years, but the OT world has been too focused on doing things in a proprietary way. By the way, I just realized that when I say proprietary, I do this, which is, I'm gonna refrain from actually naming where that comes from, but it's basically the salute that says it's not my fault. The Monday morning production meeting where it's not my fault, right? That sort of behavior is rife within the OT world, and we are working to try to bring collaboration and standards advocacy, and an environment where small, mid-sized manufacturers can benefit from the same stuff that large ones do. So, Lyman, I'd love to talk to you about the question. It's the question of the hour, right? We have to figure out how to bring this stuff to the small, medium, mid-sized manufacturers in a way that they can afford. Because if we don't, like Jake said, 98.6% of all manufacturers in this country will not be able to benefit from this really important industrial revolution.
I think we had a question right here. Is that a Blue Origin feather? Okay, I'm a huge space guy, so I recognize those. I know those guys.
Hey John, I just hear you say there is some big change, like a big differences compared to the previous 10 years. Even for maybe 50 years, we know right now, I'm a big fan for aerospace. So right now the NASA, they keep delaying the project and they fail for that. Even for 50 years ago. So what's the problem? We use the same technology as before, so we still fail. So what's the problem and what's the potential reason for that problem we are having right now?
So that's a great question and hard to answer in just a few seconds, but I'm gonna answer this way. It goes back to the rudimentary people, process, and technology. But I'm also going to add a fourth one called ecosystem, which is maybe a derivation of the people side. It comes down to the fact that 20 years ago, the IT world was working on crowdsourcing, open source to solve some really important problems like plug and play. In the OT world, plug and play isn't even imaginable to most manufacturers today. The idea that I can just plug in an asset, a paper converting machine or a crack tower or a packaging line, that I can plug it in to an information systems architecture and it automatically knows what that piece of equipment is, knows what smart content is available from that asset, and then knows how to do something with it without requiring a smart person in the middle to actually do something with it. To me, that is an infrastructural level challenge that has to be addressed if we're going to be here 5 years from now and not talk about the same cost, the same complexity, the same barriers to entry for most of the manufacturing marketplace. There are some huge innovations going on right now that we're helping accelerate at CESMII to create an environment where we can crowdsource the creation of information models with the OPC Foundation, with VDMA, with the Digital Twin Consortium, and with a whole bunch of great machine builders, technology providers, systems integrators that are catching a vision for what's going on here. And then, of course, the story builds from there. But it's about stopping the proprietary behavior, which are fundamentally no longer differentiating you from your competition, and catching a vision for the future that doesn't require everybody to start from scratch every single time they want to build something in this space.
I think manufacturers are really be driving this idea of interoperability moving forward. And it's one of those things is if you're not part of the group, if you're not part of the crew, you're not in the crew. And I see a lot of that transforming happening right now in actually the robotics and AMR and AGV part of the industry, where a lot of manufacturers want to implement solutions on their floor, but they want to buy a solution from Locus and then a solution from Mobile Industrial Robots and another one from Omron. And they say, well, you provide a little bit, you provide a little bit, you provide a little bit. But if you're not going to work together, none of you are getting a piece of the pie.
Every one of those represents a data silo. Every one of those represents vendor lock-in. Every one of those is typically its own proprietary system that can't play nicely with others. And guess what? The manufacturers are tired of that. They don't want, that's exactly the kind of behavior we're trying to incentivize going forward. Great. So by the way, we need a bag for that, gentlemen.
And I think we have time for about 2, maybe 3 more questions, just to respect everyone's time.
Hi, my name's Chris Iveson. I'm founder and CEO of a tech company in the UK. We do IoT productivity monitoring hardware, totally plug and play, and we target SME or SMB businesses. I guess my question is you talked about executive buy-in being a real challenge to Industry 4 adoption, smart manufacturing. We don't tend to see executive buy-in as a problem. It's more the wider team buy-in, because what they see is that they're being monitored and it's the whole big brother aspect. And I'm just wondering if you guys relate to that and how you guys see that playing out over the coming years.
Yeah, so it's typically you have executive buy-in and you struggle to get grassroots support from the plant floor, from the operator community, from the folks that actually make stuff, or you've got the grassroots effort without support from the executive wing. And so I think the real kind of crux of this thing is, how can you get an environment, and this gets back to knowledge, how can you bring the grassroots effort in concert with the executive support, executive sponsorship, so that both parts of those organizations can actually engage in a way that's going to make them successful? Because it's typically these things start somewhere in one of those two, I'll call them quadrants, and have to meet if it's going to scale up and be successful. I hope that's helpful.
Can you hear me? Perfect. I have a question. You talked a lot about lacked skilled workforce, etc., and talked about the generations of people, but I have 2 little kids, and my question is, how do you want to engage at the kid level and also get engaged with girls? Because I see a big difference in how you approach them. And if you don't have a role model who's enthusiastic about technology, for example, and mechanical engineering, they're not going to get confronted with it. So I think there's also a big gap in that field as well.
Yeah.
Is there some plan in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a 4-year-old daughter and 2-year-old daughter at home, so I'm already like trying to figure out how can I get them to learn stuff. Getting the future generation excited about what this industry has to offer is extremely important. I think from a current active programs out there, First is an amazing program. If you haven't heard of it, First Lego League, First Robotics, First Tech Talents. They are a program that's out there that has over, I think, 4,000 high schools, middle schools, Lego Leagues in the US that is enabling people to learn about programming, robotics, being creative, designing, and getting them into that manufacturing space. And how they're getting the manufacturing space is all those teams are actually sponsored by local manufacturers. And I think that's where we're going to see drive and change in the industry, is not necessarily always, by a national initiative, but it's also by that local community.
And I would respond by saying that we're here with SME today, the Society of Manufacturing Engineers, which I deeply appreciate. They have, and then CESMII has partnered very strategically with SME for a number of reasons, not the least of which is they have a massive education strategy for manufacturing, but for the entire sort of value chain that leads to manufacturing. And specifically, with a variety of different federal and state funded programs, SME is working very closely with a series of high schools in different states, community colleges, trade associations, and then of course the manufacturers to build a vision for this. Because CESMII has a relatively pragmatic focus on the manufacturing ecosystem and the talent pipeline out of the community colleges and the universities across the country. We're being told more and more, Johan, and great question by the way, that the decision-making process starts years and years before that. And how do we get there? How do we influence them? That's the point you're making. And so I love what SME is doing in this area around the high school world.
And it's Tooling You, right? Is that Tooling You is a great resource for that as well. Is SME's advocacy programs.
And we, CESMII, needs to do a better job working with different state organizations across the country to push that line further and further back down into the high school and junior high world as well. So good.
Awesome. Yes.
So I keep hearing one of the basic problems is that there are not enough smart computer scientists, programming people who automate the process of, for example, going from CAD to CAM, with the exception of maybe Mastercam and a few other companies. But even there isn't enough variations. Is that the core problem when we talk about lack of skill talent? Because it seems like a lot of smart people are going and becoming hedge fund.
Yes, it's a great question. So I'm sure you've got a
go ahead.
Happy to start. So I don't think the issue is a lack of smart people anywhere. In fact, by the way, when we talk about smart manufacturing, we get pushback all the time saying, well, what do you think we're doing today? Is what we're doing today dumb manufacturing? Is it not smart manufacturing? And so there's a bit of a friction with that word. But I think fundamentally we again, through the outcome of the third industrial revolution, we have not done ourselves any favors in terms of the level of complexity of and the technical debt that we've created across the plant floor. Today, how many continuous improvement engineers in a manufacturing environment are using sophisticated software? The reality is most of them are not. Most continuous improvement folks, most engineering folks are not using the software skills and the software tools that we have available in the marketplace today. I think we as a technology provider and as an education ecosystem have to go down this journey of reducing costs and complexity so that virtually every function from the operator to the continuous improvement organization can actually engage in the problem-solving process. And that gets down from the design side to the quality side, to the maintenance side, to the production side, and everywhere in between. We have to reduce complexity across that life cycle of information from every part of that life cycle. And that's not going to happen overnight, but that's how we do a much better job equipping a very talented, a very skill-ready workforce that's not able to engage in the problem-solving process today.
And then I would add on to that, I don't think it's the fact that those lack of skilled young generation workers don't exist. It's they're not entering in our industry. And I think a lot of that is, people will go out there and say, oh my gosh, these Gen Zs, these millennials, they're just entitled. They want to have these jobs right away with all these benefits. And I would say it's not that they're entitled. It's just they're a lot more aware of what opportunities and options are out there in other industries besides it was known as a manufacturer. When my dad grew up, he said, oh, you would go work for the local manufacturer because that was in the local community. And that's what his dad did. And that's what his, friend down the road did. But now as information has become a lot more widespread, younger generations are seeing what opportunities are out there. And to add on, to what you mentioned, John, I think it's one of those things is we're not doing ourselves justice to attract that workforce into our industry. I love the example of when I went out and I got my first car, my dad brought me to AutoZone and I bought a 1996 Ford F-250 Haynes repair manual catalog. And he said, okay, Jake, if you want to fix a problem one day with your car, you have a problem, you go in the back, you open up the appendix, you find alternator, that tells you to go to page 23, and that's how you fix the problem. Too many manufacturers today are still using that Haynes catalog to address problems. And I can tell you right now, when I have the opportunity to speak to a lot of millennials and Gen Zs, they don't have an issue going into manufacturing. The issue is them staying in manufacturing because they can say, why would I go work for a company that's living 20 years in the past? And that's where I think we're seeing a lot of, that lack of skilled workforce being in there. They're skilled, but the skilled ones aren't staying.
Last question.
Last question. Yeah.
Last question. I want to get the Blue Origin guy in. Go ahead.
Hi. So my name is Josh. I work at Blue Origin. One of the challenges that we've had in implementing smart manufacturing is drawing a direct line of value to the initial purchase cost, because a lot of times that cost savings are more a second order cost savings of the long-term effects, whether it's energy or time of debug. Are there messaging or branding strategies that you guys are working on to help relay that message to make it easier for people who don't live manufacturing every day to understand?
That's a great question. So I think the audio was in and out, but the question was essentially, if I can rephrase it, are there tools or ways to help us do a better job connecting the smart manufacturing initiatives to return on investment, right, to the actual value? So I think that's one of the huge gaps, back to the knowledge and the education piece. That's one of the huge gaps, particularly for small, mid-sized manufacturers who need to be really crisp and clear about how to justify the capital expense of a smart manufacturing project. Because frankly, they don't have a lot of at-bats to run through. If you're a small, mid-sized manufacturer with a capital budget of $100,000 for the year, you got to be darn sure that the project you're spending is going to see not just the second order soft ROI, but the actual hard return on investment, right? And so one of the things that we've invested in at CESMII is this idea of a smart manufacturing business assessment tool that helps you understand the sort of current state of your manufacturing process, but it also leads you towards a roadmap to advance the state of your manufacturing operations. And so that the next step then becomes, all right, so if I build a roadmap, what is the return on investment? So those are fundamentally things that CESMII is doing and is capable of helping our ecosystem with today. Again, if you have any opportunities to talk to the CESMII team here, we'd welcome a chance to talk to you. But that, to me, return on investment, cost justification is an absolute gap. A lot of great vendors here have the tools to do that, but it happens to be for their solutions, right? I mean, and I'm not taking away from that because they're doing what they need to do to help their customers justify what they're selling. But what this is an industry agnostic, technology provider agnostic set of tools to help you assess your current state, and then of course, how do you develop a return on investment strategy beyond that? So anyway, it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, let's hear it for. So we do have copies of the executive summary. It'll be available at that desk over there. And let's hear it for John Dyck, the CEO of CESMII, Jake Hall, the Manufacturing Millenial from Feyen Zylstra, for a terrific presentation. Thanks.